Welcome back to Block TV. Well, crypto Twitter serves as a never-ending stream of information, thoughts, and discussions about the world of cryptocurrencies. It's a mammoth task keeping track of it all, but fortunately we're joined every week by Nathaniel Whittemore, who lives and breathes the ecosystem and combines all the best of the best into his Long Read Sunday column. Nathaniel, thanks so much for being with us again this week.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so kicking us off this week, it's an interesting theme and perhaps a telling point at how quickly narratives can change in the crypto space, because you started this week with a theme that says a good week for global crypto. Today's been a bit of a rough day, but break down a little bit of your thinking on this one, Nathaniel.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever had a long read Sunday that is so out of date by Monday as this week. It's actually out of date by the end of the day yesterday. I pushed it out too early. I mean, basically, it was kind of a struggle to just not write about global markets and Corona. But one of the things that was notable last week was two global crypto stories, right? So the first was that the Supreme Court of India had overturned a ban on banking. So the Reserve Bank of India in April of 2018 had banned financial institutions in that country from working with crypto exchanges. And after a huge number of hearings and just time on task, that was overturned. Now that fight will be ongoing, but I think obviously for the Indian crypto community, it's a huge shift and a really exciting one. And then just the next day, we saw South Korea, the Korean National Assembly, pass a measure that basically integrates crypto, or could integrate crypto fully into the financial system. And the interesting thing about this is that this means more regulation, right? More KYC, all that sort of stuff. It brings crypto in line with the FATF's recommendations. And so the interesting thing for people was that they, were cheering for this largely because it means, an improvement of the ability for banks and other financial institutions to service crypto companies in that area, and also the possibility of new market entrants, right? Institutions that weren't comfortable before. So although it seems in some ways counterintuitive that more regulation is something that people are going to be really excited about, both of these stories had big positive impacts for the crypto communities, particularly in the places that they were relevant to.
Perhaps an important point to highlight then as well, although as you say, it might have gone out of date in the sense of it being a good week for global crypto, but those fundamental changes, I suppose, will outlast any short-term price shifts and perhaps a point of perspective for people.
Yep, exactly.
All right, so moving on to your number 4 for this week, and a nice little caption, I guess, a clip that seemed almost tailor-made for social media to all pile in on wholesale. A bit of mathematical error there on MSNBC. Take us through what exactly happened and why social media enjoyed it so much.
So basically, there had been a very viral tweet that said that Bloomberg, how stupid was he for spending $500 million on ads for this election that he, didn't do anything in. He could have given everyone in America $1 million and still had money left over. And so this is, one thing if this just stays a viral tweet, but then NBC had it as the centerpiece of a segment where Brian Williams and someone from the New York Times editorial board are talking about just how profound this was, right? Not getting the error that it's actually more like $1.50 or something like that. That if you actually do the math of 500 million divided by 327 million. And so obviously social media piled in because it was in particular because of the mainstream media side of this, right? There is no one right now who likes mainstream media. It's just a matter of which type of critique you want to deploy, and this just sort of seemed to embody that so profoundly, right? That they were trying to make this point about wealth inequality so intensely that they overlooked this glaring math error. Now, the thing that I thought was interesting about this, and the part of the discussion that I thought was really valuable, isn't this Schadenfreude aside. It's the fact that people have this sense of economic dislocation and the unfairness of system so profoundly that they're willing to, that they just gloss over this unbelievably obvious error, right? They want to believe. And in fact, the original author of the tweet doubled down and was basically like, yeah, sure, I got the math wrong, but the point remains that Bloomberg could still give every American $1 million, which is obviously, that would be more money than all the real estate in the world put together is worth. So the power here, or the thing that I think is really important, is people feel like there is something wrong and they're on the wrong side of a raw deal, and it's very hard to fight feelings with facts. And so I think it's a context, that economic dislocation and the feeling of unfairness, I think, is a real part of the context for everything that we're seeing with the crypto industry and people's reasons for being in it.
Certainly a powerful lesson in the power of narratives, how they can change, edit, move, and shift throughout the space. But turning to your theme 3 for this week, and now this one, I suppose, while relevant to a period of time, no longer so, but the Corona Vegeta potential meme as Bitcoin tipped back above 9,000 briefly before now heading down into the $7,000 doldrums. But what's your take here on how the community can work with these shifting narratives?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the joke was sort of that it's a couple weeks ago, Bitcoin looked very much to be tied to equities and other assets. Last week, it kind of got up over 9,000 and just stuck there pretty much all week. And now, obviously, we're seeing everything crater in tandem. And I think that people want to be able to explain price shifts in easy ways, and they want to understand exactly what's going on so they can get some sense of what might happen next. And I think it's interesting right now, even all morning, everyone on crypto Twitter is there's like 3 different articles right now on CoinDesk, on other places, about how maybe this is actually a sell-off from the Plus token scammers, as though the world wasn't having this cataclysmic massive sell-off, surrounding coronavirus, surrounding this oil price war, and it's not to say that there isn't that added pressure too. And Lord knows, I would be very happy if it's just Plus token sell-off. But I think that it's a good reminder that we are so thirsty and for easy narrative explanations that sometimes we kind of ignore the obvious too.
Certainly a valuable lesson to put out there around how those narratives are perceived and tested through time, something that Bitcoin and the cryptocurrencies as a whole don't yet have a lot of under their belt, still in an adolescence perhaps. But moving on to your next subject for this week, which, Nathaniel, I think we'd both agree here is something that is relevant not just for now, but has massive impacts on the future of, dare I say, humanity as a whole and where it is headed. And that is, as you've titled it, the privacy implications of coronavirus, something which is now, as people start to take hold of this particular crisis, are starting to think about what the potential implications could be here. Break down what your thoughts were on this particular topic.
Yeah, so I started thinking about this about, I guess, 3 weeks ago now, when I saw a news story that China was using basically purchase records of, they were tracking people who might have coronavirus by going back and looking at anyone who had bought cough and cold medicine for the previous month. And that's just an unbelievable amount of surveillance, obviously, the power to actually do that. And so, I had started thinking about this then. And then I think what's happened since then is that as we've seen the US just, catastrophically mishandle the situation, there's a part of me that worries that we're going to see some backlash where, if China is actually on the upswing, and this isn't all just kind of another fog, you might see a scenario where people look over at that surveillance and say, hey, maybe that's worth it, right? Look at how well they were able to do. And we're starting to see some amount of that fight around data here in the US too, particularly around airline records. Mike Pence met with airline CEOs last week to try to get data on passenger records for who would have flown in from different places. And so I think that it's an under discussed part of this, because obviously there's so many more clear and present things, but it is times of crisis when authorities consolidate more control. And so I think it's worth keeping an eye on, even if it feels like we have more pressing issues right in front of us.
Right, and this is certainly a very salient issue at the moment, in which people are sort of willing to hand over more information for the sake of stymieing, limiting, mitigating a crisis as it plays out. But as we saw for one example, in the United States, in the wake of 9/11, with the Patriot Act being passed and fundamentally changing a number of different elements of surveillance and privacy in the United States, do you think that we're going to see, maybe not something necessarily to that scale, although time will tell, but do you think that that sort of rollback of privacy considerations is under threat to the same degree in a more drawn out, perhaps, crisis like we're seeing here with coronavirus?
I don't know. It's hard to tell. I think that for better or worse, the violent conflict is something that people are even more responsive to, right? Like there was no debating after September 11th. I mean, there's debating about the appropriate response, but there's no debating about what happened. We're seeing now with coronavirus, people still holding on to this narrative that it's just the flu. And so I think that when there is that wide type of disagreement, it's harder to consolidate control. It's maybe one good thing about the fog of war in this particular scenario. But I don't know. I think that we are unfortunately still just at the very beginning of this. I do think that the intervention, we're more likely to see mass scale financial intervention than health intervention at this stage, just based on the president that we have and the priorities that he has.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, an important point. That leads us to your last theme for this week, that notion of what comes next. And indeed, an important question as this crisis seems to be only gearing up, particularly in Europe and the United States, while there are some signs of easement and perhaps hope over in Asia. But what's your take on this, Nathaniel?
Well, the what comes next was answered at least a little bit this morning in the markets, and it's not good. I think that the question is, it's almost like what do the authorities do next? Yeah, what will the regulatory response be? I think from a market standpoint, that's what markets are going to want to see and going to want to know, and I don't think that it's just going to be more rate cuts that can do it. So that's one dimension of it. The health part is a whole different part. It's unbelievable in America to watch. People are having to act, companies are having to act, states and cities are having to act completely without no guidance from actual authority, because there's just an unbelievable leadership deficit in this area. So you have every company. I have numerous clients now. They're all switching to work from home. I think you're going to see that at a mass scale. I think the best hope in the U.S. that we have is basically voluntary social distancing. So I don't know. It's a good time to live up in the Hudson Valley rather than New York City, though. Certainly,
an avoidance of the cities for those that maybe have that opportunity. An interesting point you raised there about in your analysis there about what's happening over in China, where we're actually seeing stock markets regaining some of the ground that they lost. China's obviously intense action at one point, quarantining or locking down 750 million people, seems to have paid off somewhat. Do you think we're going to see the same sort of actions or concerns coming out of the West?
It's almost impossible to have I would be shocked to see anything close to that scale of coordinated action. It just is. It's not in our DNA to be tolerant of that type of coordinated action, and it's also it would be more than an about face from where the government is currently. So that seems unlikely to me. I will say with China, I think that the worst case scenario right now is that we find out that the recovery is being dramatically overstated and that it's actually still really bad there, and the economy is actually floundering. The supply chain disruptions are actually bigger than we thought. That would be the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is that we actually do get to see some amount of recovery, because effectively crises are the worst when everything is in crisis at the same time, right? When all of the kind of cratering is coordinated, and because this happened earlier in China, we have the potential to see what it looks like on the other side, which is a hopeful sign for people. Like I said, assuming that it actually does get better rather than just kind of it's more questionable information.
Certainly important questions to be asked at this stage when we seem to be standing on the precipice of a pretty serious calamity. We'll have to see how this week plays out. Already, as you said, before markets have even opened in the US, we've had a complete turnaround in some of the potential narratives this week. So much more to change. So Nathaniel Whittemore, I want to thank you so much for giving us your Long Read Sunday. Look forward to seeing where we're at next week when we have this conversation. But in the meantime, stay with us at blocktv.com for all the latest in news and information. I'm Asher Westrop Evans. Thanks for watching.
Watch us on Amazon Fire TV and Roku.